everyone. This is Shalini Kantayya. Am I pronouncing it? Okay.
Kantayya. Exactly right.
She is a documentarian and a filmmaker. Her debut was Catching the Sun, which was produced by Leonardo DiCaprio. Coded Bias, which we just saw pieces of, premiered at Sundance in 2020 and was nominated for an Emmy. And in 2022 at Sundance, her new film, TikTok Boom, was nominated for a grand jury prize. So I just wanted to invite her here today because so much of what she showed in 2020 is, what CDT was talking to us about, just earlier today. Again, with the fascinating and frightening, I mean, it really is something that makes you think about everything that you do and everywhere you go. And I wanted to invite her here to talk to us about the film, but also about what she's seen change and what she's seen stayed the same in the past couple years. So with that, Shalini, I'll let you take it away.
First of all, thank you so much. It's such an honor to speak with you. I have such respect for journalists and the work that you are doing to keep sort of the backbone of our democracy, our information system, healthy and in the public interest. And so I'm deeply grateful and indebted to you. And so much of my work as a documentary filmmaker relies on brave reporting like journalists, by journalists like you and by whistleblowers. So I am deeply indebted to you for the work that you're doing. I, as a documentary filmmaker, work in a medium that that is called creative nonfiction. And so part of what I do is journalism. In the case of Coded Bias, I think it's really important to understand that my way in was not through technology. I think that when I started Coded Bias, I don't think I fully even understood what an algorithm even was. My only street credential was that I was a self-proclaimed science fiction fanatic. Definitely someone who had watched Blade Runner way too many times. And everything I knew about algorithms, machine learning, AI, was sort of from the imagination of science fiction filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick. I'm definitely someone who's watched Blade Runner way too many times. And I stumbled down the rabbit hole when I read a book called Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, and subsequently many other books, Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Sophia Mojanoble. And I don't think before reading that book, I fully understood the ways in which algorithms, machine learning, AI is increasingly becoming this invisible gatekeeper of opportunity, increasingly deciding really important things like what gets into our news feeds on social media, but even more importantly, like who gets hired, who gets healthcare, who gets pain medication, how long a prison sentence someone may serve. And at the same time, as I was beginning to grapple with the ways in which we as human beings are outsourcing our autonomy to machines in ways that really change lives and shape human destinies, I came across a TED Talk that Dr. Joy Buolamwini gave. Then she was a graduate student at MIT. And, in that TED Talk, she explains what is now the opening scene of Coded Bias. She was just trying to get an art project to work, and she was using a commercially available facial recognition technology. And that facial recognition technology could not see her dark face. And she would put on a white mask, which was whiter than anyone's face. There's no one's face that's this white. And yet it would register that face as a human face, but not her darker skinned face as a human face. And what was so, I think, chilling to me to witness this myself and understanding the history was that this racially biased technology was not being beta tested on a shelf somewhere at MIT. This was technology that was being sold to the FBI. It was actively being sold to ICE, our immigration officials. It was technology that was actively being sold to police departments across the country and used oftentimes in secret, with no one that we elected, no one that represents we the people giving any kind of government oversight. And that's when I started to begin to understand that big tech was selling these racially biased, invasive surveillance technologies to law enforcement with no one that we elected giving any oversight. And that's when I really began to understand that's everything that I love and value as a free person living in a democracy, be it free speech or fair and accurate elections or equal opportunities in employment, or that communities of color shouldn't receive undue police scrutiny. That everything I hold dear is being radically transformed and rapidly transformed by algorithmic systems. And that's really what I began to understand, what Dr. Joy Buolamwini and Dr. Kathy O'Neill and Dr. Sophia Mojanoble and so many of the other astute scholars in coded bias articulate so clearly, which is that there's a real danger of rolling back 50 years of civil rights advances in the name of trusting these algorithms to be fair, to be neutral, to be unbiased, when in many cases that's not the case. And that's just not a fact. And that's sort of what set me on the journey to make this film. And I think that in some ways it would have been much easier to make a film about facial recognition. In some ways, it's the most visceral way that we can understand these kind of technologies, these invasive surveillance technologies, something as personally linked to you as your biometric data. And the way in which, it is very much like a fingerprint or a genetic swab, both of which require a police warrant to obtain. And yet oftentimes our biometric data is being taken from us, sometimes by willful consent, and sometimes it's just assumed. And I think that when I first began studying this, I didn't really understand. I sort of had heard this argument that I don't have anything to hide. I had heard these issues sort of framed around privacy, and privacy is a word that I don't have any sort of emotional, urgent response over. It feels sort of like a nice to have. And I think the more accurate term is invasive surveillance. And the danger here is that you have democracies essentially picking up the tools of authoritarian states with no democratic rules in place to govern its use. And so what is dangerous is that these kinds of biases can exist in these black box algorithms that affect healthcare and prison sentencing and loans. And that is what is so dangerous. And what I found most shocking to me was that this can happen in spite of the best intentions of the programmers. That it's not some like nefarious, hoodied tech bro who's like, ha ha ha, I'm going to roll back civil rights. But sometimes that this happens because The algorithms are running off of data that is ridden with historic inequalities and picking up on those same inequalities. To give a couple of examples, there was an Amazon hiring algorithm, and herein the programmers had benevolent intentions. They wanted to level the playing field and create a hiring algorithm that was unbiased. And lo and behold, that algorithmic system starts to pull on data, looking at who got hired, who got retained over a number of years, who got promoted. And lo and behold, the algorithm begins to discriminate against anyone it can discern as a woman. And in that case, Amazon discovered it and pulled it offline. But one of the dangers of these technologies is sometimes we don't know that this discrimination is happening, that there's no transparency, that there's no accountability, that there's no human in the loop. And what's worse, as the consumer, there's such a power differential because sometimes we don't even know that there was an algorithmic system involved. We just know that we didn't get the opportunity we thought we deserved. We didn't get the job interview we thought we were qualified for. We didn't get the loan that we needed to start our business. And therein lies the danger that this poses. And I think what I hope Coded Bias hopes to do is help us understand the ways in which data rights intersect with human rights, the ways in which data rights intersect with civil rights. And the other thing I just want to say is that I don't think I really fully understood what a complete psychological profile could be built about me based on the data that is bought and sold by data brokers online. And take, for instance, the example of Cambridge Analytica, where you had, this data leak go out and a company basically identify the 100,000 people that had the psychological profile of a swing voter and begin to target to those 100,000 people who had this, they deemed having the psychological profile of a swing voter with misinformation. And so you can see the ways in which, these algorithms can interfere, particularly with democratic process. Our political speech, as journalists, has all these kinds of laws and these kinds of spaces of how we can do it. And when it appears on Facebook and Instagram, sometimes we don't even know if it is political speech. And there is the danger. And what is unnerving to me is I interviewed Dr. LaTanya Sweeney, who is the former chief technology officer of the FTC. And she said that what is happening is that technology companies are essentially rewriting the rules of society in ways that we cannot see and cannot question. And what that means is that we are moving from a democracy to a new kind of technocracy. And I thought that was extraordinarily chilling, especially because I'm not quoting Orwell. I'm quoting the person who was charged with policing the internet, governing the internet. And so I think that speaks to the urgency of the work. And I just want to say that, as dark as Coded Bias is, a journey down a dark rabbit hole of how these algorithms work, I feel like it's a very hopeful film. I make documentaries because they shine a light that everyday people can be heroes, not all the sort of superheroes in our society are wearing capes. And I'm so grateful when I get to shine a light on people who are making real change. And since the making of this, since the release of the film, I've seen sea change that I never thought possible. I mean, starting with, this sort of small locality change where technology hubs who are most educated about how these technologies work have been the first to ban facial recognition by law enforcement in places like San Francisco and Oakland and Cambridge and Boston. But also, I never imagined that three of the largest multinational tech companies would change their policy to selling facial recognition to law enforcement. And that's exactly what happened in June 2020. IBM did something incredibly unprecedented, which is not only did they, initially bring joy in and make the technology less biased, but they actually put their money where their ethics are and shut down their facial recognition program. They won't research it. They won't deploy it. They're done. Microsoft said they would stop selling facial recognition to law enforcement, and Amazon put a 1-year pause on their sale of their facial recognition technology. And I think that sea change happened for three reasons. I think one is that we need brave scientists and brave journalists like you who too often have to put their academic and professional reputations on the line to challenge this industry that has, in my opinion, too much power for a healthy democracy. And we need more inclusion in the rooms where these decisions are made in tech companies, and we need also more inclusion in the way that they're told, I think, journalistically. I think we need wide scale literacy around these topics. Again, I hope the film plays a small role. I know the work that whistleblowers and journalists plays a large role in how these topics get communicated to the public. And last but not least, that sea change happened in June 2020, and that timing is very important because that's when you had tens of thousands of Americans, people all across the country and all around the world of all colors sort of joining arms against the unjust murder of George Floyd and sort of taking a stance on systematic racism. And I think those three things, brave scientists and journalists unencumbered by corporate interest, who dare to tell the truth, wide scale literacy in the STEM technologies of the future, and inclusion that will enable us the citizen education to challenge big tech and to use them critically, and brave, engaged citizens of a democracy participating. And I think those three things can move the dial forward. And I'm so grateful for your role in sort of bringing in shining a light on the truth. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I'll ask a question if folks are being shy. So I wanted to get back to the literacy part of it that you just mentioned, because I think that a lot of, certainly my parents barely know how to use Facebook, so they definitely don't know that the black box effect, like the idea that the people who create these things don't know how they work. I don't think that they would believe that. How do you think that we as journalists can explain that better to the public?
I had 2 years where I joke that I couldn't talk to people at parties because people would ask me what I'm working on and I couldn't explain it. I would sort of scratch my head and say, I'm making a film about racist robots. But I think that, the film, I would really encourage, the best way I know how to explain it is through the film. And it's why I work in the visual medium, because it really took me years to try to boil it down to 2 minutes. But one of the things that I love about the film is that I often get feedback that my 12-year-old or my grandma really loved the film. And so that's what I've struggled so hard to do, And I think when it comes to AI, all of the knowledge has been in the hands of the few. So all of the power has been in the hands of the few. And so I think that one of the things I hope Coded Bias seeks to do is, pull up a chair for all of us. And I think the more that we can sort of intersect these kitchen table issues with how algorithms work, the more that we can create a sense of urgency. My last film is about TikTok, so I'm also very passionate about the impact and equity issues for on these technologies for children. And so I think that the more that we can share the film, and there's also a number of tools on the website and organizations at codedbias.com/ like take action that you can share.
Hi. I first want to say thank you so much for, of course, creating this film. We watched a couple clips of it a little while ago, and I'm over here super emotional, super charged, super frustrated at the same time by what's happening in our society, and very concerned with how algorithms are influencing the flow of mass incarceration. And I know you mentioned that algorithms are influencing sentencing time. So I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about the sentencing time. I know that it's impacting who's getting arrested, but what does it look like on that end of conviction?
Yes, I'll talk about it in two ways. And I just also want to honor the way that you're feeling, because these issues are emotional and they impact real people's lives and opportunities. And the ways that I've been seeing algorithms be used in policing are two separate ways. One is predictive policing, something, and the other is predictive sentencing. I'll talk about predictive sentencing a little bit. And there's great reporting done by ProPublica and Julian Angwin's team. They were the ones whose journalism that I'm citing in Coded Bias, actually. And it cites that these predictive algorithms were sort of judging risk, much like the person in the film. So oftentimes, if someone is on probation, like Latanya Myers is in my film, that these algorithms will be used to judge their risk of reoffending. What is dangerous, I think, points to the question that Anne was just asking, which is that we have blind faith in these computers, right? And so we're living in an age where if a computer says something and you say something, well, you're wrong. This computer's always right. We have this like sort of blind faith. So the judge gets this score of a high risk probation. Nobody understands how this stuff works. It's like crypto, right? Nobody understands it. Everybody pretends to, but nobody understands it. And so basically, they just get a score, a big magic score. And, in some ways, they don't want to be the one that questions it because they don't understand. Now, I can look at that and be like, how is this data set now that I've made a film and sat with so many, data scientists and say, what was the sample population? Is it because she had an offense as a 12-year-old, by the way, for, beating off an abusive step parent, basically? And so, but because she was a minor when that happened, maybe that's why she can't get ahead. And she's been a stellar, like awards from the mayor, awards from the, and what was so scary about that is her probation officer and the judge couldn't overturn that score. It comes as this definitive thing. And I've sat on panels with judges where they talk about how big tech is introducing these technologies without properly understanding what is the accuracy of this algorithm, this big magic. How much of this is science and how much of this is bogus baloney pseudoscience that is used to perpetuate, for them to make money. And so I think that's one way. Another way is through predictive policing, and this is done by companies like Palantir, where they say that they can actually predict where crime is going to happen. So you can be more efficient about policing because you're basically sending police back to the same communities that have been over policed for 3 decades. That was nervous laughter. But basically what they're doing is basically taking data. And by the way, we don't have crime data. What we have is arrest data. I live very close to Wall Street, and I can tell you that those are not the same thing. And so basically, and could we ever get a sense of what actual crime data would look like? And so if we are just sending police back to the same communities where arrests have systematically happened, are we just penalizing the same communities that have been over policed and over scrutinized and over brutalized for decades? So I think those are two of the ways. And then I think there's also just this facial recognition, this racially biased software. What is so disturbing is that I don't know what clips were shown, but in the film, which is also available on Netflix in full, there was a 14-year-old child in the UK that is stopped by 5 plainclothes police officers, and it is never explained to him that he was misidentified by facial recognition. And I tell you that I watched that scene 200 times, and the hair on my arms I never stopped emotionally responding to that moment of trauma for a 14-year-old child in school uniform. And it's only because the human rights observer is there explaining to me, you've been wrongly identified by police use of facial recognition. And why I had such an emotional reaction is, we're in the UK, they don't carry guns. If that child had responded how I felt like responding, which I felt rage every time I watched this happen, this open violation of civil rights, that it could have resulted in a fatality. And so I think that is the danger that's happening here. And I think when I was tuning in, I heard a little bit of the conversation in the film where Jim Jordan, right-wing Republican, is agreeing with AOC, left-wing Democrat. And there's a moment where Jim Jordan says, well, wait a minute, 117 million Americans are in a facial recognition database that police can access with no one elected giving any oversight. And seeing him be as scared as the Democrats, I was like, oh, this might be a legitimate issue for civil rights. And that's why organizations like Color of Change are pushing for a federal ban on law enforcement use of facial recognition. And again, a lot of that is on the codedbias.com /take action website, missions by the ACLU and Algorithms Justice League and other great organizations doing work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. I just am curious what else, if anything, tech companies are doing in response to coded bias and other critical looks at the products they develop. I mean, one of the reasons this bias gets baked into algorithms, as Joy Bolamini points out in the documentary too, is that it's made by groups of white men. I mean, is that changing? What else is going on at tech companies?
It's a great question. I think that I'll talk about this in 2 ways. One is the bias part, and the one that is much deeper structurally than the bias part. I think Silicon Valley has had an inclusion crisis and has since its inception. And one of the things that I've grown in compassion for in the making of this film is just bias as an inherent human condition. It's not just something that's like sort of in bad police officers or a few bad people, but it's actually in all of us. And that we all have blind spots that we can't see. And that means that, you know, inclusion in these technologies that are deployed on the world is not just something that's good for the pictures, but absolutely integral to building innovative technologies when you're trying to be vigilant and control, mitigate bias at all stages of the design and deployment of these systems. But I just want to say that I think in some ways coded bias is misnamed because it's a bigger issue than just the bias. It's also, I think, more broadly about unintended harms. And I think structurally, big tech companies are getting too big for healthy democracies. And I think what needs to happen first, we have to get literate because we can't question how these systems work unless we have a society that understands the big magic of what is in your Facebook feed, that understands why you're getting that TikTok video and your friend is getting the other, that understands that when you go to a library that you're gonna have a different information experience than Google. I have to teach young college students all the time that Google is not anyway, a cited source, which I know you know. And so I feel like I feel like that wide scale literacy is really important because I think there's a lot of pseudoscience happening and a lot of big magic happening. And I think that we need some systematic changes. And one of the things that I've been on panels with legal scholars, and I think that the EU is sort of leading the way, I think, in democratic rules around this. They passed the Artificial Intelligence Act. Really, they need better naming. And I think one is called the Digital Services Act. And basically I may have gotten the names wrong. They're named really poorly because they're human rights acts. I feel like they should be better named. But what they do is basically prevent use of artificial intelligence in high risk scenarios like healthcare. We're here in the States, you have insurance algorithms that have been shown to give white patients better quality of care than Black patients. And so in the EU, there have been more protections around not using artificial intelligence in healthcare, in sort of criminal sentencing, not using facial recognition in public spaces, something very key in a city like New York, which is full of CCTV screens. It would change my experience as a democratic citizen although I don't know. I mean, how they're using it is the truth even today as a citizen. And I think that those are some of the things, and I'm not even sure, maybe you can tell me, where FOIA requests can get us about how police is using these kinds of technologies, because I know a lot of times it's in secret and we don't have any information or data about it. But I think that we need some systematic changes. And what I was trying to get at in a roundabout way was there was a legal scholar at Stanford who was questioning black box algorithms as being that for instance, we have a Food and Drug Administration, and that doesn't mean that pharmaceutical products, they have to undergo some sort of review for health and standard of health and safety. And it's my belief that we need that kind of thing for algorithms, some way of vetting health and standards for health standards, safety standards for these algorithms before they get deployed at scale. But I think all of this comes from us getting educated and us educating our representatives, because we know Congress isn't keeping scale with technology.
Hi, Shalini. I wanted to ask you a question about your creative process and some of the more artistic choices you made in visually telling this story, because that's also my primary medium is video, and I definitely understand the challenges of trying to visually tell the story of some of these more abstract and seemingly invisible technologies. But for instance, like, why did you decide to personify an algorithm, and give it a female voice? And also some of the sound effects that you used when you were displaying the facial recognition capture. Those are, I feel like, a little bit more artistic choices, and just wanted to understand a little bit of your thinking behind that, because sometimes a layperson has a certain idea of how certain technologies work, and it's not actually how these technologies work or look like.
I love the question because I actually it's my first actually I talk about the issues, but the artistry is actually what I do, and I think that it was such a challenge to tell a story like this. It was such complicated science, and it was so hard to maintain the integrity of the science and sort of boil the genius PhD research of great scholars into sort of 2 minutes that was somehow cinematic and accessible and could be understood. And it was a really difficult process. And I think that I really rely on my background as a science fiction fanatic and the language of science fiction, because I know it's so much about, I think, how most of us understand these technologies. And I think it's part of the reason we misunderstand these technologies, quite like I spoke about my own journey from sort of my imagination of what artificial intelligence is to my understanding of what it really is today. And I think that I pull from that visual repertoire of films like 2001, which I didn't understand how many young people had not seen that film. But I hope the reference still works. If you haven't seen the film, which I think is a very sad existence. If you haven't seen 2001, please see it. And so I really pull from, Philip K. Dick and other visuals, and then try to explain it really carefully. And in the making of this film, it's so funny, all the swear words are actually transcript. And so that evolution of the voice of the robot was very interesting, because it actually moves from a journalistic endeavor to a creative voiceover. So the first half of the film is actually Tay. It's transcript of it becoming this anti-Semitic, misogynist, racist robot in 16 hours, this Microsoft thing. And so the beginning of it is straight transcript, and then about halfway through it's sort of this second tier, and it sounds much more like Siri and Alexa and all the other female tech voices that serve us versus Watson, his male voice. And so I wanted to choose that to talk about how comfortable we're now getting with these technologies. And so you see them visually denoted in different ways, because I had to make the clear break so the audience understood that one is sort of pure documentary and journalistic, and another is sort of voiceover written by me, essentially.
Hi, I was just generally interested in whether or not, all your research and the work you did on this movie, if that changed or influenced how you use your technology, what you choose to do, like how hyper aware you are of certain things that you think may be exposing you to algorithmic bias in terms of facial recognition tech or anything else. I'm just curious about sort of that in terms of your personal life and sort of how it informs your work as well going forward.
I think what I've been amazed, sort of aware of these two films that I've done on tech, Coded Bias and TikTok, is that our society has shifted massively since 2007 in ways that in ways that almost seem like our society is unrecognizable. And I don't think that we as human beings have really begun to reckon with the seismic shift in our culture since the advent of the iPhones. That's what I really feel. And I think that, my last film was about TikTok, and they're the first generation of human beings coming of age online. I think it's a seismic shift in our society, in our societal structures, in everything from the architecture of how our information is organized and how we receive it. I mean, I never thought in my entire life that I would see a democratically elected president, like a coup d'etat in my own country, basically. And that has to do with our information landscape and the integrity of it. And, when I hear people saying these outlandish ideas, the first thing I ask them is, where are you getting your news? Like, tell me what you're listening to. What are you watching? And I think we need some understanding of this. I just also want to speak to Section 230. Is it Section 230 of the FCC? That needs updating. I think that there are more rules that govern my conduct as an independent filmmaker. And I want you to be aware too, that when I, apply for insurance, to go to broadcast, I have to basically produce a Harvard dissertation on every assertion in my film. And I still had trouble getting it insured just because I was taking on big, powerful interests. And I think that it is humbling, and it's something that I want us all to be aware of, because I think we're just in an age where these companies are getting so powerful, and we're seeing that with the dumpster fire that is Twitter right now. And what is happening to our public squares and the integrity of our information. I'm very concerned. I'm a geek. I love libraries. I grew up in a public library. I'm very concerned that there's a generation that doesn't understand the integrity of information and journalism. And so I don't know what we can do to get a common set of facts back, except for hold social media companies responsible for what they put on their websites. I mean, I just feel like there has to be some, there has to be some accountability for the truth. And I think what Facebook did, look at what Facebook did in Australia. There was a fight around journalistic integrity, and I would look at what happened there. I don't want to cite it because I don't want to miscite it at this point, but it's changed everything, I think, for me, about how I see the world, how I see the way our societies are developing. And the other thing I just want to say is just more personal. I'm really concerned about mental health of young people. I'm very concerned that we now live in a society where people of different viewpoints can engage in a respectful civic dialogue. I used to be able to have dinner with people of different political views, and we may not agree, but we'll still shake hands at the end of the night and, respect one another. And I am very concerned that we are losing that. And so I'm a lot more concerned about the health of our democracy than I've ever been in any time prior. And when I look at historically where democracies have failed, and democracies are always the most rare and most fragile of any system of government, what's happening now is giving me great cause for concern. In many ways, the way information can be weaponized and the like.
Another quick question, and I wanted to maybe get your opinion on, I guess, the expanded potential use of algorithms and sort of algorithmic models and public services beyond sort of the carceral state. We talked earlier about the IRS like kind of facing a backlash because they had tried to roll out this facial recognition technology for tax people who were filing their taxes. They got a lot of backlash for that. I've read some stories in certain states where child protective services have been trying to incorporate algorithms, and that has also received backlash because of the risk models are maybe potentially misidentifying folks or giving them poor scores when they don't, deserve them as well. And there are some, like, I've heard arguments that the advantage is there. It's like, well, they do help out with the labor involved in that, and it does ease up the burden of these, in CPS's example, the burden on those overworked workers in terms of management and such. But it's like, there's still, like, obviously problems with it, and I'm just wanted to get your general opinion on that potential expanded use in those public services.
The person that I would most, who writes about this the most is Virginia Eubanks. And she writes about, her citation really in the film is that we think about these surveillance technologies, these forward technologies being used on the rich, but usually they get used on the poor first. And if they don't do anything to protect their civil rights, then they come for us. And you could see this during the pandemic, even, where people were getting sort of ATM cards so the government could look at what you bought with their money. And so I think that we should all be concerned with the use of this very private data that can be linked to us. And, you even see it in public education, where during the pandemic, technology companies were trying to get into homes using their proprietary software. So I would push back on any kinds of this kinds of surveillance, particularly on poor communities and communities of color, who are most likely to be vulnerable to these systems, like the residents in Brooklyn in my film, where the landlord tried to put facial recognition in. And that same landlord owned properties in Manhattan and never tried that there, but they tried it in a low-income community in Brooklyn.
I'm not going to say I'm going to play devil's advocate, because that way lies being a total jerk. But I am curious, is there a benefit, or, like, I feel like being able to pull all of this into the world, like, now we're recognizing, like, holy cow, this data set's totally biased because we don't promote women. I feel like there is an opportunity to use this, as long as we recognize it, to kind of bring into the sunshine some of the structural racism of our society and that sort of thing. And I don't know if there are conversations about that, if there are efforts to, like, recognize that, because I mean, you have to know something exists to fix it. And I do think these conversations are becoming much more apparent in places where these decisions are made, and that's great. So I'm not trying to say this is ultimately a positive thing, but are there ways that it can be used, or should we be thinking about using it, kind of weaponizing it the other way for social justice?
There's no economic model at the moment that would promote this most powerful technology for public good. What we have is basically a couple of different economic models. One was coined surveillance capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. And I think as long as we sort of have this model where companies are extracting our data at no economic benefit to us, with us having no recourse or rights to our data, I think that it is a recipe for, exploitation. And I think the other model we have, of course, is sort of the authoritarian model, where you have unfettered access to data. And so what Yuval Harari says, and I'm paraphrasing again, is who owns the data is the government. And I think what he says is that who owns the data is so powerful. And what is happening is that you have all of this power of these new technologies consolidated in the hands of a few companies in the US and China. And because companies like Google and Facebook and Alibaba and Tencent have had, a 20-year head start on the collection of data, it's very hard for innovators to, if you've ever tried to use DuckDuckGo as your server, that it doesn't work as well as Google, because it hasn't collected as much data about you. And so I think that with the present economic models and with no rules in place, democratic rules in place, to give us some balance to the unfettered power of big tech, it makes it really difficult. I mean, there's reporting in the film that Facebook, with a small tweak of the algorithm, can swing an election with nobody noticing. I mean, we're in unprecedented waters, and I think that the only way that we can do this is that we do something to bring the power of big tech into balance. And that either has to come from legislation or a new economic model, or being able to examine these black box algorithms before they go to market with some standards of safety of citizens, or creating a data rights as human rights bill of rights for all Americans. So by way of being citizens, we have some rights over our data. Until we get some protections, I just think that we don't have the framework for innovation towards using AI for social good. And I'm not saying there are no uses of AI for social good, by the way. The person who's using, who invented facial recognition was probably thinking, oh, we can identify, early onset of autism in children or something. I'm not saying there. If you want to talk to tech, there's endless good uses of tech. But I think the big question is, how do we get the benefits without the harms?
So something I'm wondering about, I find in 9 out of 10 articles I write, there's always more information that I want to include than ends up in the final product. So I'm just curious if there was any stories or topics that got left on the cutting room floor that you wish you could have included in the final film that you didn't get to.
There is a series on the cutting room floor, and I hope there will be many more films about on this topic. But I think I continue to sort of be engaged with the space of big tech, and I have this film called TikTok Boom, which is now on PBS, and I also am fascinated with the issue and will continue to engage.
So one of the things that I didn't get a chance to show among the clips that I thought was really interesting was in China, how you not only need to consent to facial recognition to get on the internet, which at this point is just a basic part of living and participating in society, any society, but also that they were limiting train and plane travel for folks. And obviously, it's been used in even worse ways in terms of, identifying the Uyghurs and things of that nature. I wonder, I know China is sort of a different beast, but I wonder how you see this. Oh, did we lose you?
No.
Okay. The potential for this in other kind of more authoritarian countries, I feel like we haven't talked as much about, Orban or Erdogan or other places like that.
Well, I think that obviously, in China, they have someone from the CCP who is more stationed at these social media companies, and also they have, unfettered access to their citizens' data. And I think that what we'll see, and kind of what comes across of my TikTok film, is what that means of TikTok is owned by a Chinese AI company. What does that mean? And there's been fear about it being sort of weaponized for propaganda. And so, many people, and that concern also came from this head of the FTC. It wasn't just the one in the Trump administration. And so I think it poses these very unique concerns. And I think we're just like living in a new age where wars are going to be fought in new ways, using information in many cases. I think we saw some of that in TikTok around rhetoric around Ukraine and Russia. And so I think that the internet, which is, the ideal of it was thought of it as this borderless place, is sort of really also being challenged by these different internets, where you have China that's sort of closed off from the world, and then the US that, also tries to not sometimes allow, we saw with Huawei and others, and even with TikTok, that tension between where this line is, because in a globalized world, and the ways in which apps can be weaponized. We saw there was that Russian app where you show how old you are after 10 years. And so it's just very interesting when these things that we think are gamified become tools of authoritarian states. So I think there's new concerns for journalists and for democracies around this kind of data collection.
Thank you. We have 20 reporters in here. If you were their editor, what would your first assignments be?
Oh, wow. My goodness. Well, I think right now I'm very passionate about the Child Online Protection Act and the impact of social media on young people, and the way in which companies like Instagram knew that they knew that, the use of their product was causing anorexia, eating disorders, anxiety, depression, and suicide in girls, and hid the data for 2 years. And I think with these companies, almost everything that has been in my documentary has come through the work of brave journalists and whistleblowers. So almost anything on big tech, shining a light on big tech is appreciated. But I think in this case, what I feel is the Child Online Protection Act is the best case. If we can't protect the most vulnerable among us, if we can't protect a brain that is not yet fully developed from the most persuasive algorithms in the history of the world, then we're not doing our job as a society. And so I really feel that the mental health and safety of children, and the way in which this is impacting us, really needs to come to the forefront, because we can't pass legislation unless more research comes forward.
Thank you. Shalini Kantayya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be with you. And thanks so much to the brave journalism that you're supporting.
Thank you.
Thank you.